Happy Thanksgiving to those of you that celebrate, and for those who have little to no idea on what this holiday is, essentially it's a day for friends and family to come together for a meal, usually with turkey being the main course. Then that's followed by catching up with people you haven't seen since last Thanksgiving, maybe watching a little bit of American football, or abandoning everyone entirely and shopping for Black Friday deals. But this year, that all changes because there's a new Thanksgiving tradition in town in the form of a new horror film. Thanksgiving takes place in a small town in Massachusetts with a dark history of a horrific Black Friday. And a year after this tragedy, a slasher dressed as a pilgrim dishes out punishments to those they feel have done wrong. As far as the cast goes, I'm only going to mention a few of the actors and who they're playing, then I'll fire off a list of other names in the film. But starting with the main character, Jessica Wright, we have Nell Verlake. As her father and owner of Wright Mart, Thomas Wright, we have Rick Hoffman. As the sheriff, Eric Newland, we have Patrick Dempsey. And as Jessica's friends, we have Tommaso Sinelli, Jenna Warren, Addison Rae, Gabriel Davenport, Jalen Thomas Brooks, and Milo Manheim. But getting into my review, I will be structuring it like usual, starting with the positives, then the negatives, then I'll end the review with my ranking. So without further ado, let's get into my review for 2023's Thanksgiving. Now, getting into the positives, the first one I'd like to mention is the overall tone. As far as the tone goes, there's definitely a fair amount of suspense, but also mixed in with a fair amount of dark comedy. So while you can be on the edge of your seat watching the slasher go after someone, you can also kind of laugh at the absurdity of what's happening on screen. The film definitely doesn't take itself too seriously, and with the story being told, that's probably for the best. But that leads me into my next positive, which is the story. As I was saying, the story is kind of ridiculous, but that doesn't mean there isn't any fun to be had. In fact, I would say there's quite a bit to be had. The kills are very creative and gory, might make you squeamish, but also might make you laugh at the absurdity of them, as I was mentioning before. Along with that, the film makes you think anyone could be the killer, reminding me of how I felt watching the original Scream for the first time. But on top of all that, the film's opening is really what makes this story work, in my opinion. The film opens with that Black Friday that went horribly wrong and sets up the tone and plot for everything that comes next. And I hate to say the beginning of the movie is the best part, but it honestly kind of is. And that's not to say what comes next is mediocre or bad, because I really don't think that's the case. But I will say without that opening scene being what it was, this film probably wouldn't have worked quite as well for me. But the last positive I'd like to mention is the performances from the cast. Now, these aren't Oscar-worthy performances by any means. I really don't think this is the type of film for that, and I don't really think the actors were trying to go for that. But what they did achieve was being very believable in a film that, as I've said many times, is kind of ridiculous. And I guess just to name a couple standouts, I think that Nell Verlake and Rick Hoffman were amongst the best. But overall, I think everyone fit well in their respective roles. But that's all for the positives, so making my way into the negatives. And the first one I'd like to mention is the film's pacing. Now, I'd say the pacing is steady throughout the first and second acts, starts to drag a bit in that second to third act, and then the third act seemed to drag the most. And part of the reason for that is the story. I think it's not as strong in that area of the movie, but a bigger reason for it is the runtime. I'd say there's just a little bit of fat that could have been trimmed off this movie to make it flow a little bit better. I believe the film is something like an hour and 47 minutes long. It honestly probably could have been an hour and 35. There's a couple scenes in there that were fun to watch, but probably weren't necessary in the grand scheme of things. But overall, like I said, it's more the runtime than the story itself. But getting into the second and final negative, which is going to be the film's story. Now, I know I mentioned the story and the positives and had some great things to say about it. And I even just mentioned it a minute ago when I was talking about the pacing, saying that the runtime is more the issue and less the story. But at the end of the day, I do have a bit of an issue with the story, and that's that the film's opening is so incredibly well done, both story and filmmaking wise, that it kind of feels like everything that comes after is destined to be at least a little underwhelming. So by the time I got to the end of the film and everything came together, I won't lie, I was a little bit underwhelmed. But at the same time, I'm not really sure what they could have done with the story differently to change that. But that's all for the positives and negatives, so let's get into my ranking. And since this film is currently only available in theaters, I'll be ranking it under my theatrical film ranking system. So as far as my ranking of 2023's Thanksgiving goes, I'm going to go ahead and give the film a standard ticket. I think there's plenty of fun to be had with the film, especially if you're checking it out in a packed theater like I did. And sure, I might have had a couple of issues with the film, but overall, I can't say I'm disappointed. But those are just my thoughts on Thanksgiving, and I'd love to see yours down in the comments below. Have you seen the film? What did you think? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Are you in the middle? Have you not seen it? Are you planning on watching it in the theater, at home, or not at all? Really, any comments you have for me, I would love to hear from you. I respond to as much as I can. But do me a favor and leave a roasted thumbs up, bake the subscribe button until golden brown, and ring the bell to come to Thanksgiving dinner.